could quit chocolate. Cold
You
turkey,
could.
just like smoking. And
Yeah.
some people can, some people can't. Chocolate that we'll talk about. So there's been a lot of press for as long as I can remember about chocolate, and you'll see a headline where chocolate is good for you, headline where chocolate is bad for you. So how do we make sense of all this? And we've seen the same thing with coffee over time. So it seems like there's these certain topics that people fixate on, and then is it good, is it bad? And I guess we can focus on chocolate and perhaps more accurately cacao at this time.
I think a good place to start is determining like what you're talking about when you're talking about chocolate. If anybody's been on a tour of a chocolate factory or a chocolate business, which I highly recommend, a great date opportunity as well. We've been a few times. They import the cacao and they separate it into the butter and then the chocolate part. And it's a process, and they refine it. And then depending on what ratio they're going to make, they kind of mix it back together with sugar at times. So to me, chocolate, you're talking about the butter and then the refined dark chocolate part. So depending on the ratio you mix that back in, it can be higher in fat. The butter, of course, has a lot of fat in it. And then the chocolate part has a lot of antioxidants, it has epicatechins, it has a lot of the beneficial compounds, and many of them have been studied individually as well. For example, epicatechin as a myostatin inhibitor and an antioxidant as well. And then if you add in a lot of sugar and a lot of the butter or fat, then those are going to have separate health effects rather than just the pharmacologically active compounds.
Yeah, and I think that's an important distinction. Is when I think of chocolate, someone will say, well, I have a small amount of chocolate each day. Okay, is that a Hershey's milk chocolate bar?
Yep.
Or is that 85% dark chocolate? Or is that just a scoop of raw cacao?
Mm-hmm.
So you have different levels to it. And what most people are going to do is probably not take a raw cacao supplement because they don't tend to be very palatable, often bitter. So
Yep.
they're either talking about your standard candy chocolate bar or a dark chocolate bar. Both of those are going to be high in fat.
Yep.
The sugar content is going to be much higher in, I guess we're picking on Hershey's, but the Hershey's bar.
Yeah.
So I don't expect to get sponsored by them. But in any case, the dark chocolate is something like 85%. The dose is what is important there. I don't think that eating an entire dark chocolate bar that's going to be like 400 calories
Yep.
is a great use of your calories for the day to get your nutrition in.
Yeah.
1 square of that seems to be all that you really need to get the different benefits that are seen. So that's about 60 to 80 calories depending on how the bar is broken down. And then you see some improvements in gut microbiome diversity, probably because of some of these other compounds that are in the cacao itself, probably not because of the saturated fat.
Yeah.
And then you also see a bit of a boost in mood, and this is something I think is partially mediated by I want to say it's paraxanthine that's in chocolate. Now, there's some caffeine in chocolate also, and paraxanthine is a metabolite of caffeine. So there's a bit of a mood boosting effect there. And then when you look more at just cacao by itself, those other compounds there, some of which we probably still don't even know about, seem to be able to modulate blood pressure. And typically this is looking at reducing blood pressure. When you're looking at reducing blood pressure, a problem you have a lot of times is people have different fluid volume status, especially as you get older. So you don't want to push somebody's blood pressure too low. And when that happens, you have orthostasis side effects. You get up, you're dizzy, you fall down.
Yeah.
With the cacao, they actually did a study recently looking at, if we give this to people, is it possibly going to push the blood pressure too low? And the answer was no. If the blood pressure was elevated, it lowered it appropriately. This is very mild, so probably less than 10 points systolic. It's not going to replace your combination antihypertensive therapy. But it could be a useful adjunct, or it could be a useful tool for someone with very pre-hypertension levels, like a systolic of 128 that they want to be closer to 120. So I think that's interesting, and that's a trend I see with a lot of supplements, is that they tend to be more modulatory than directly targeting one aspect of health, regardless of the level.
That's certainly one property of most supplements that is advantageous over medications, especially for optimization purposes. Another good test that you can do if you were a chocolate lover, for example, myself, you can use something that's called, and most refineries or chocolate shops would have this, cacao nibs. And the nibs are basically a product that is taken before. It has some fat, but it is very bitter. There's no sugar in it. And you can add those to something like Greek yogurt, and you can see if you still like the actual like bitterness or the taste of the beneficial compounds in chocolate, while removing the variable of being in a chocolate bar.
So if someone right now is addicted to Hershey's chocolate bars, I've heard people say this, I'm addicted to them, I just can't stop eating them. How would you wean yourself off of Hershey's chocolate onto something like cacao nibs?
I suppose there's a few ways to do
We
it.
talked about smoking, now we're talking about quitting chocolate.
Yeah. I don't think that there would be a great degree of physiologic dependency or physiologic addiction. So you could just switch straight to cacao nibs and see if you're actually addicted to chocolate or if you're addicted to the sugar and high content of fat or cocoa butter in it. But I suppose the easiest way to do it, if you wanted to have a nice trickle down, is just increase the percentage of dark chocolate. Go up and up and up in percent. Eventually work your way to cacao nibs. And that way, if you're addicted to the beneficial compound in that, then you're good to go.
Yeah, it's an interesting topic, and there's many strategies. I mean, you could quit chocolate cold turkey, just like smoking. And some people can, some people can't. But at the end of the day, I think it's the cacao compound itself, as opposed to the other things we add to it that have the health benefits.
Definitely.
Let's see.
One more point on chocolate is the compounds in it could be particularly beneficial during pregnancy as both antioxidants, and there's a few studies, I believe, on epicatechin as far as like breathing or potentially being beneficial for the respiratory system or diaphragm of the fetus. I don't know if that has to do with its lecithin to sphingomyelin ratio, perhaps its ability to produce surfactant, or maybe it just has to do with the function of the diaphragm in general. But it is potentially a great option during pregnancy, of course, watching the calories as always.
Yeah, and maybe that's a topic that we dive into is, what do the current guidelines say for pregnancy, and, what are some things that could be potentially added there that have, neutral or beneficial effects on health. But perhaps we save that one for another day. We could probably do an hour just on that.
We could for sure.